Thanks for coming. The reason we called this press conference was just to make sure we're all on the same page as to what happened with the Franklin suspect, Reese Keith. Officers initially on Sunday afternoon were called to Faith and State Road 135 in Greenwood on a hit-and-run accident. The caller stated that they observed a white male suspect, later identified as Reese Keith, run from the scene. He was subsequently located a couple blocks from there in someone's yard. Officers then took him into custody. While there at that scene, the suspect had a full-blown seizure, and medics were called, and he was transported to Community South Hospital. Our officers then responded to Community South Hospital, where doctors eventually cleared him. They did conduct a blood draw for evidentiary purposes, and they transported him to the Johnson County Jail. Once he got down to the Johnson County Jail, the suspect was complaining of pain in various spots of his body and claimed that these were due to the accident that he had been involved in. The officers then took the suspect to the Johnson Memorial Hospital, which is next to the jail. Several hours there, the doctors looked him over and then cleared him again to be transported to the jail. When they got him back over to the jail, that short distance just between the hospital and the jail, he again suffered another seizure. So he was transported back to Johnson Memorial Hospital, where the doctors told the officers they were going to admit him for overnight purposes and treatment. The officers were there at Johnson Memorial Hospital till approximately 11 p.m. and they contacted the on-duty supervisor and asked if they could because they did not know, they did not give us a time period for how long he was going to be there. The doctors didn't know. The officers then requested and were given permission from the on-duty supervisor to leave the scene and file the paperwork and the charges with the prosecutor's office the next day. Sometime during the night, according to the hospitals, around 4 in the morning, they believe the suspect left the hospital, and then that led to him going to the victim's house in Franklin, where he attacked them in their own home. There's been some questions. We have been reviewing our policy on this. We are changing our policy. This is, our hearts go out to the victims in this case. We did not see this coming. In fact, he would not have been left at the hospital and having charges filed had we any indication that he was a violent offender. There was nothing that we had that would indicate that he was going to go do what he did. But because of that, we are reviewing our policy. We are changing that policy to where instead of that call being a call that an on-duty supervisor makes, that call will now go to a on-call deputy prosecutor, who will then contact the on-call judge, and the on-call judge can make the decision then whether to release a suspect on their own recognizance in cases like this. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I found several warrants for Mr. Keith that are actually active. So at any point did any officer make any inquiries about whether he was wanted or not? Or?
Yes, I mean.
Sorry.
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry, guys.
He did not come up as wanted when we were there on the scene. I think what may be showing up on him now is that these charges have been filed so that there is an active warrant out for him in Johnson County on these charges.
These are prior warrants that stem back from April.
He was also using an alias when he was booked in, and so Reese Keith or Keith Reese, he was booked under Keith Reese. So if there are other warrants under Reese Keith, well, number one, he never got booked in. Typically, you might find that out when they take his digital fingerprints and booking. It'll come up if he's been in there before, but that didn't happen. So literally, we had him as Keith Reese, and his true name is Reese Keith.
Could we forget about all the prior stuff and just look at the situation from that night, Matt? Here we have a guy in a stolen vehicle, stolen plates, hit and run, high on heroin, needles with heroin in them. You said that, I got the tail end of that, but you're going to be adopting a policy. But do you really need a policy to make an arrest on something like that?
The policy isn't whether to make an arrest. The policy is when we go and view this, and we're taking that decision away from a street level supervisor, and it's going to go through the prosecutor's office and a judge in the future. That's the policy shift.
But do you need a policy in order to, I mean, he was at the hospital, officer, to my understanding, left the hospital. This guy's free to do whatever he wants after, consequently, the burglary took place. Do you need a policy to make that decision, that executive decision, that an officer should stay here at the hospital with this guy, given all of those things that he did prior to? And I'm talking about the hit and run, I'm talking about the needles, etc.
I'm not sure I totally follow your question. We have policies for just about everything we do in a police department. Even with the best written policy, this is a very varied job. And foreseeing the future in a job like this and understanding what's going to happen every day, it's very hard to write a policy that covers everything. You got to rely on a lot of just good decision making and some common sense. Obviously, if we knew that this suspect was going to go out and hurt these people, we'd have left an officer there around the clock. When you look at the resources we have and what we have to deal with, you look at this person and say, the best of our ability or knowledge at the time, he was a nonviolent offender. Yes, he was in a stolen car. Yes, he hit and run. And yes, he had drug offenses. There was nothing there to indicate to us, and we've reviewed this through the chief's office, we can't find anything that any of the officers have stated to us that would indicate that this man was going to go out and victimize these people. And so, yes, 2020, absolutely, he would not have been left alone.
Lieutenant, were there two officers with him then the entire time?
Yes, well, one of the officers was a trainee, so they had their field training officer and a newer rookie officer.
So there were only 2 medical episodes, not 3?
There was a total of 3.
There were 3 episodes.
There was the medical episode where he went into a full-blown seizure at the scene where we located him in the people's yard. A medic was called and transported him to Community South. That, checkouts usually take a couple hours, so the officers go to the hospital. They drew the blood, and the doctors at Community South then clear him that he is well enough we can take him to the jail. Once they got down to the jail, though, the suspect starts complaining of pain due to the accident. So the officers had to take him to Johnson Memorial Hospital, where then several more hours went by as they do their tests and they make sure that he again is well enough to go to the jail. Then the doctors cleared him to go to the jail. Then, the short distance from Johnson Memorial Hospital to the jail, he again suffered another full-blown seizure. He was taken back to Johnson Memorial Hospital, where the doctors told the officers, we're not going to sign off on him to go to the jail. We have to admit him overnight.
Was he handcuffed, sir?
When he was being transported, yes.
When he was in Johnson Memorial, how was he detained? What are you using official? Was he under arrest?
Yes.
Was there arrest?
Yes.
So when they called the supervisor, did the officers ask, is it on arrest or on handcuff? What is the actual, what do you use when you call the
and that's where people, I think, get a little hung up. When you're in police custody, you're under arrest. Whether I'm detaining you for questioning, their intent was to take him to the jail that night. Absolutely. We weren't able to do that. And so, basically, the way you can effect an arrest in Indiana, you can file paperwork, you can file for a warrant. So at the part where it was unknown how long he was going to be in the hospital and what his actual condition was, they requested and were granted permission by the supervisor to leave and file the paperwork with the prosecutor's office the
And
next
was he
day.
handcuffed at the time, or what was his condition?
I don't know. Once we left, he would not have been in handcuffs.
And is the department aware of the sheriff met with police chiefs in the latter part of 2016 when he explained the policy that if you're not fit to be in the jail, the sheriff was not going to let you in. Is the department aware of that policy?
Absolutely.
So you are
That's the
responsible.
jail. The jail does not want sick people in there. Then they're responsible not only for their well-being, but also paying for their medical bills. So, yeah, that's why he couldn't be remanded to the custody of the sheriff's department, because it's their policy that if they're not healthy enough to go to jail, they won't accept them. So that's why our officers have to take him then to the
I asked
hospital.
about that policy because there's another policy that is on the books with the Johnson County prosecutor, that when something like this happens, you are to call the prosecutor's office and require the court intervention to do that. But that did not happen in this case. So what happened? You said there's a change of policy to a policy that's
On our end.
Right, but that's the current policy. So why were you not following the policy that the office of the prosecutor, who you work with hand in hand, right, your friends, the office, why wasn't that policy followed?
We did not know of that policy. In fact, this is the way we have operated when we have things like this. I've been here 23 years almost, and this is the way we've operated. We've never had a situation like this come up before to where it really draws your attention to it and you go, is there a better way we can do something? The chief is then looking at this, our policy, and hey, how can we do this? We find out, well, the sheriff's department does this differently. We did not know about that, but that's what we are going to
So
adopt.
in the past, then, sir, when there was a situation with an inmate or suspect who was hurt, did your officers stay around the clock with that person until they were allowed in the jail?
If we stayed around the clock with a person, it was a violent offender. Okay, so yes, we have stayed around the clock with violent offenders.
You've done that, okay.
Okay, but when you look at nonviolent offender, you know, you make a decision. In this case, and it's very unfortunate, we don't feel good about this, that these people were victimized. I don't think in law enforcement you ever feel happy that maybe a decision you or somebody that worked for your department made, that it went wrong.
But Matt, I understand you had no way of knowing what was going to happen after this guy was released from the hospital. And I understand you aren't familiar with the prosecutor's office policy. But why do you even need a policy to know, given the fact that he was involved in a hit and run, given the fact that he was high on heroin, stolen vehicle? Why do you even need a policy, or why do you even need to know what the outcome was ultimately going to be in order to make the executive decision to stay at the hospital and make sure this guy gets to jail? Because it sounds like everything that he did that you guys did know about it would warrant an arrest.
I'd have to disagree with you on that. We did not know he was any kind of violence. You know, I can understand maybe from a public view, you know, but people think, oh, you're in possession of stolen property, you know, you should be arrested. And we did try to do that, okay? The city police department is not equipped to house prisoners. We don't have a jail. We don't have jail staff. There's just no way. We don't have that ability to do that. So if you're going to be calling personnel in to sit around the clock with a prisoner, you want to make sure that, you know, you're spending your resources wisely. We don't have unlimited resources. The reason you have policy is in the admin office, the chief, so forth, when you're making those policies are guidelines for your officers to follow, okay? So you need to have a policy so those guys know, the officers, lieutenants, and sergeants that are working the street, they know, hey, we have a policy on this, and this is the way we have to handle this situation. You can't make policy for everything because you don't know everything that's going to happen. But in something like this, we have had to do what we did Sunday night in the past, where we have left the hospital, we've filed the charges. We've just never had this happen to where the suspect then went and victimized someone. So when something tragic like this happens, you really do then take a look at your own agency, what you're doing, and you try to improve it, you know. And I think immediately, you know, yesterday, that email went out. We instructed our officers, we're not doing this way anymore. So, yeah, we're trying to improve the process the best we can with what we have to work with.
So, Lieutenant, you have left people behind in similar circumstances. You have left
Yes.
other people
Yes.
in the past several months, weeks?
Years. We have followed this for years.
When they are left behind, are they in detention? Are they?
Typically, no. No. Sometimes, you know, depending on again, each case is a case-by-case basis, but you might go, we used to go, hey, hospital, when they're getting ready to release, give us a call, and we'll send an officer down to pick them up. Again, only if they were nonviolent. Now, when you have HIPAA regulations, the hospital will not call you. So unless you post an officer there next to that bed 24/7 until they're released, you're not going to get that notification.
And so is that what this policy change is dictating? The call that the deputy prosecutor will make will be whether to post an officer there on guard? I mean, is that the decision that...
Yes, basically what this does is, I'm not even saying that this policy could have avoided this, because when you look at Johnson County, almost everybody that's arrested in this county has to post bond. That's not the case in Marion County. The case in Marion County is a lot of your lesser offenders, as this person may or may not have qualified for. I understand they do their bond up there by a matrix, depending on your criminal history, the charges you're coming in there, and so forth. If this was Marion County, he may have just been booked in and booked straight back out and released on his own recognizance. You know, and so with this new policy, if in the future, what we will do, if this comes up again, we'll contact the prosecutor, who will contact the on-call judge, who will listen to the facts of the case, the history of the suspect, what charges we currently have, and the judge will make that call then to release them on their own recognizance, or then if the judge says, no, you have to post officers there, then we'll post officers there.
That is the current policy, and I just for clarity's sake, I'm not trying to beat you up, this is not personal.
That's all right.
So
That's
I
all
want
right.
you to know that, right? Because we also want to get answers as well. That is the current policy of the Johnson County Prosecutor's Office for the past, is it his second or third term, I guess, I don't know. But he's been there for a bit.
I don't know how long it's been their policy. That's just it. We didn't know about it.
But shouldn't someone, either city legal or someone, if not you, the chief, ask, hey, what do we do? Are we doing the right things? In the sense so that you would not be at this point? Because no one wants to be here.
You know, hindsight, I think you can go and do that, but certainly we never did ask, because again, like I said, I've been here for over 2 decades serving the Greenwood Police Department, and this is the way we've always done it. And so you would think, if you want to sit there and go, why didn't anyone ask? Why didn't anybody ask us, what are you doing? This is our policy. We weren't aware of it.
But even after the sheriff spoke to the chiefs, I mean, surely when you look at your liabilities and your resources, you just mentioned that, right? You don't have millions of dollars to post an officer at every hospital in this county. But even after the sheriff spoke to the chiefs of police and said, hey guys, if you're not fit to fit in my jail, you can't say, didn't someone say, well, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to watch people? What are our policies?
When the sheriff sits there and says, if we're not going to accept people, because, you know, they won't accept you if your blood alcohol content is 0.15.
Right.
They will after we take you to the hospital and have you checked out.
Right.
So this aspect of it had never came up in that conversation, as far as calling a judge and calling the prosecutor and getting someone OR'd, okay? And that's what we're talking about. Nobody can afford to pay, depending on what their medical bills are. And if they're in your custody, you're liable for their medical expenses, whether it's the sheriff or whether it's the city of Greenwood. So that conversation that you're talking about was a conversation where the sheriff sets guidelines saying what prisoners he will take in his jail. I don't fault the sheriff. I mean, that's an expensive thing to run as a jail, and the liability is huge. We always have liability in this line of work, so you try to manage it the best you can, and I don't fault him for that at all, but that conversation was different than this. This subject didn't come up.
What's your timeline around the policy that you are hoping to implement?
I can let the chief explain that. Chief John Lau.
Right.
And Chief, if you could also answer this question, can you, in
Let
layman's
me
terms-
go back to this one first, please, okay? Mr. Sanchez, we did not know this policy existed in the county. And I'm going to share with you because my night shift lieutenant, when I sent the email out, contacted the deputy prosecutor and said, hey, the chief just sent this out. This is new to me. What do we do going forward? Quote unquote, Drew Foster says there's a procedure in place already that the county uses for county cases to OR. Inmates, they are simply going to extend that policy out to the departments now. Unquote. We did not know. And as the assistant chief has said, We followed the practice that we've been following for years. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. There's a 90-year-old World War II veteran who's a victim of a home invasion robbery. No, it's not. But it's never happened before. This is the first time this has happened. Policies change. This is a perfect reason why they change, and it will change.
If you could, Chief, could you tell us in layman terms what the policy is now and what it's going to change to?
In layman's terms, if the jail will not take them and they're in the hospital, if they're admitted, the officer did exactly what they do. They act as shift supervisor. Is it okay to leave them here or not? They make that call.
How's that call, or how's that decision made? What determines?
Case-by-case basis.
Nonviolent versus violent?
Nonviolent versus violent, you know. In this case, since we want to what if it, what if this guy had suffered some type of brain injury, and he had been 2 seizures now, and he admitted and had his MRI, and they found out that he had a brain bleed. So the hospital was the place he needed to be. We don't know. We just act with what we're given.
We're not arguing that the hospital wasn't the place that he needed to be, but when he was medically discharged from the hospital, jail seems like the logical next place for him.
When we tried that 3 times.
I guess the question is, as far as the policy and how you guys are going to do as far as keeping officers available, any thought or talk about changing the policy as far as the hospitals are involved? Because it sounds like you're saying if you would have got the notification that this guy was done as far as his treatment, you would have been able to...
That is out of our bailiwick. With the hospital...
I guess the only question I have is presumably, say, on a case-by-case basis, someone else who's a nonviolent offender goes through their treatment and they're free to go, in a sense, because, they're a nonviolent offender, and they could essentially be maybe the next person to do something like this, the next day commit some crime that, we don't want to be here for. But if you get that phone call, it gets you there before that person can do it. So even with the new policy, anyone is capable of potentially doing something that doesn't fit the previous rap sheet. So I don't know if the hospital's involved and brought into this conversation, or any thought about maybe they could just make a phone call, because it seems like that one small phone call would have gotten this guy into jail instead of...
Every hospital has different policies. Where Greenwood sits, we deal with St. Francis South, Community South, and Johnson County Memorial. Different hospitals have different policies. I can't, we try to cooperate. The 2 hospitals up north have security that cooperate with us. We, quite often we'll leave somebody up there and they say, hey, we'll keep an eye on them.
But was he discharged? It sounded like he snuck out on his own.
Mm-hmm.
They found his monitor in a stairwell. I mean, and that's the biggest question I'm sure we've all been hearing was, what's to stop a drug addict who's likely desperate in a hospital from getting up and walking out on his own?
You'd have to ask a hospital that. If it's somebody we put in there,
Regarding him or not?
I can't answer for a hospital. All right? I don't know what Community South does. I don't know what St. Francis does. Then they have somebody who is going through withdrawals.
Was he wearing a monitor?
I don't know.
Chief,
Was he still in police custody when the officer left, or was he considered released?
Considered released.
Released from police custody.
Chief, will the new policy require city council approval, or is it something that you can go ahead and implement effective today?
Any policy or rule or regulation goes before the Board of Works.
And so,
They approve it.
will that be something for the next couple of days, weeks? What is the...
Well, as soon as I can get away from here and start working on it, I will.
New policy being implementing what the prosecutor's office has in place.
Yes, absolutely. If we'd known about it 20 years ago, we would have been doing it 20 years ago.
But why?
I can't explain that.
Can't explain why a policy is needed, why you can't just look at the facts and make that decision.
I'm sorry, rephrase it.
I asked Matt the same question. Why do you need a policy to make the decision that this guy needs to be in police custody, this guy needs to be behind bars? I mean, given everything that he did that night, do you really need a policy to say, I think that we should lock him up?
Sure, he should have been locked up. But he had a medical condition that warranted him being into the hospital.
Matt, what does in terms of making the decision to leave an officer to guard him or not, what will a deputy prosecutor bring that a supervisor who's been involved in the situation up until then, what will they...
All right, I understand. This is going to be a case-by-case situation, all right? This isn't going to be every time somebody goes in the hospital, we're going to call the deputy prosecutor and say, hey, can we OR him? Okay, if we take somebody in on a violent crime, we will have somebody there. All right, but if we take somebody in who's involved in a hit-and-run accident and is injured, that's when we make the call and say, hey, is this okay?
How does this address the underlying issue, though? Seems to be the problem is that you don't have enough officers to stay with every person at every hospital. So changing who makes the call, how does that address the issue of not having staff necessarily to be at every hospital every time?
This isn't about staffing right now, all right? It really isn't. This is about a policy that's going to be changed. It's an unfortunate incident that affected, as I say, a 90-year-old veteran and his soon to be 88-year-old wife. You know, my compassion goes out to these people. My own family, my grandparents were victim of a home invasion robbery. They're awful. It changed their life. I'm sure it's going to change these people's lives too. And yeah, so we would rather be out hunting this guy down right now and doing the best we can on this and putting him back behind bars where he belongs.
And what can the public do to that end, Chief?
I'm sorry.
What can the public, as you just put out a plea, for people to get involved, to help you find?
The more people that see his picture, the better. And to contact Crime Stoppers, the United States Marshal Services are actively hunting him down right now.
I know there was some talk about putting his name incorrectly into the system to see what you guys came up with since he was ran reverse the first time. Did you guys get a chance to do that yet at all?
Yes, they have his correct name and information now. But you understand at the time of the scene, which I was not there, the assistant chief was not there, he was giving us all sorts of aliases. And several times they ran different names. That happens all the time. You know, obviously if you have a warrant, you don't want to give the right name.
And are you not concerned that because the criminal mind is on overtime trying to evade you, how are you going to be, right? Criminals, that's what they do.
Oh, yeah.
They spend all the time, they don't want to see you because they know they're going to end up. If they are giving you these fake names, considering, and I think that's the question that my colleague was asking, since this person was trying to evade justice and he was in a situation, you couldn't really get his full criminal record. It did not allow you to make the choice that you would have made had you had the entire criminal history.
They believed they had his right name at the time because they talked to another individual who identified him by a tattoo.
So then at that point then, Chief, in Marion County, this dude has a record between here and Kokomo. At that point, do you not think then that an officer should have stayed? If at that point your officers knew that this guy had a record, why wasn't the officer?
Hindsight's 20/20. If the officers had known that at the time, it would have changed everything.
There was auto theft. There was battery. I mean, now you're telling me you knew about this dude.
No. We did not know about his past criminal history at the time. All right, that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you.